It started with a phone call. Not the dramatic kind, no tension in the voice, no ominous pause. Just one of those casual family updates that seem harmless at first. My husband, Mark, had answered while I was rinsing dishes, half listening as he said, "Yeah, of course you can stay with us. Just until things settle." I dried my hands slowly, looked over. Who was that? He smiled the way people do when they already know you're not going to love the answer. Ethan. He's going through something. Needs a place for a bit. I hadn't seen Ethan in almost 6 years. Not since our wedding. Even then, he'd stayed mostly on the edges, tall, reserved, carrying a camera and not much else. Mark always said he was the free spirit of the family, the one who moved through life without packing boxes or tying anything down. And now he was coming to stay. The guest room hadn't been used in months. I found myself tidying it with more care than usual, ironing the sheets twice, fluffing pillows, setting a small plant by the windowsill. I told myself it was just good manners. But there was something else underneath it. A quiet stirring I couldn't name. The day Ethan arrived, the weather turned unexpectedly cool for August. He stepped through the door carrying only one duffel bag, eyes tired but warm. "Hey," he said. That's all. Just one word. But the way he said it, with a kind of familiarity that cut through the years, I felt it. He hugged Mark first, then turned to me. For a moment, we stood there. I don't think he was sure whether to hug me. I wasn't sure either. "It's good to see you," I said. "You too," he answered. His voice was softer than I remembered. That night, we all had dinner together. I made roasted chicken with rosemary, something safe and domestic. The conversation was easy. Ethan asked about work, about the neighborhood, about the garden out back. He noticed everything. "Still drink tea in the mornings?" he asked. I blinked. "You remember that?" He smiled. "I remember everything. It shouldn't have meant anything. But it did." Mark laughed, oblivious. "Some things never change, huh?" Ethan nodded, eyes still on me. "Some things do. And some things just wait." I looked away. Something about that sentence stayed with me. The days settled into a rhythm. Mark left early each morning. I worked from home, graphic design for small businesses mostly. Ethan wandered in and out. He went on long walks, took photos, cooked lunch sometimes. His presence in the house was quiet but noticeable, like music playing in another room. He never asked me personal questions. But somehow, I found myself telling him things anyway. One afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a half-finished project, when he walked in and placed a cup of green tea next to me. "You looked like you needed this," he said. I hadn't even realized he was watching me. "Thanks," I said, trying to hide how much the small gesture affected me. "Can I show you something?" he asked. I followed him out to the back porch. He held up his camera and scrolled through a few photos. Sunlight, shadows, the way the curtain caught the breeze. "This house has light that wants to tell stories," he said. "You do too." I felt my breath catch. Mark was kind. He was good. But he didn't see me like that. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. Later that night, after dinner, Mark fell asleep watching the news. I stayed up, pretending to read. Ethan passed by the living room on his way to the kitchen. He paused. "You never answered my question." I looked up. "What question?" "If you could go anywhere, where would you go?" I hesitated. "Honestly, I don't even remember how to want that." He stepped closer, but not too close. Just enough. Then maybe it's time to start remembering. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was quiet, filled with that tender kind of light that only comes just after dawn. I walked downstairs barefoot, drawn to the back porch. Ethan was already there. He didn't turn around, but I knew he knew I was behind him. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. "Didn't want to," he said. "Not through this." He turned then. Looked at me, not in a way that crossed a line, but in a way that acknowledged one existed. "This moment," he added. "This feeling that something is about to change." I knew what he meant. Not because anything had happened, Not because I wanted anything to happen, but because there was something quietly crumbling inside me, some carefully built wall that was beginning to crack. He never crossed a line, but he reminded me what it felt like to be truly seen. And I had forgotten how powerful that could be. That night, I found myself sitting in the guest room after everyone had gone to bed. Just sitting, looking around. The smell of him lingered faintly, soap, cedar, something else. I ran my hand along the duvet, not for any reason, just to feel present. In that moment, I realized what the real temptation was. Not him, not even the attention, but the idea, the possibility that I could be someone more than the version I had settled into. Someone curious, someone awake. When I returned to my bedroom, Mark was snoring gently. I slipped beneath the covers, turned away from him, and whispered to the dark. Where would I go? The answer came, quiet and unshaped. Anywhere I didn't feel so forgotten. There's a certain kind of silence that grows between people, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that tiptoes through the hallway and lingers in the space between glances. That's what the house became after that night. Nothing had happened. Not really. But I had felt it. And I knew he had too. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I made breakfast like I always did. Eggs, toast, coffee. Mark's usual. Ethan wandered in barefoot, hair tousled from sleep, a t-shirt hanging loosely from his shoulders. Smells good, he said casually, like the air wasn't charged. Just breakfast, I replied, forcing a smile. Mark entered a few minutes later, half awake and already scrolling through emails. He kissed me on the cheek, the way he always did, gentle, habitual, distracted. Ethan looked away. Days passed, and with them, the quiet pull between us deepened, not in words, not in gestures, but in pauses. In the way our eyes met a second too long. In the way our conversations curled around things we didn't say. We never talked about the moment on the porch, but we both avoided it like something too delicate to touch. A fragile stillness. One afternoon, Mark called from work, saying he'd be late. I felt it, the subtle shift in the air. Ethan knocked on the edge of the doorway. Want some company out back? I nodded. Not because I should, but because I didn't want to be alone with the ache that had settled in my chest. We sat on the porch swing. The sky was dusky, clouds stained in soft coral. Do you ever wonder what life would look like if things had gone a different way? He asked. I turned toward him, cautious. What do you mean? He shrugged, his gaze on the horizon. Paths not taken. Words left unsaid. People you almost became. I laughed, but it wasn't funny. I think about that all the time. He looked at me then, really looked. I do too. That night, I found one of his photographs on the kitchen counter. He hadn't said he was printing anything. It was a candid of me, sitting on the back steps, elbows on knees, chin tilted slightly up, eyes somewhere far away. I hadn't known he'd taken it. I should have been angry. I should have asked why. But I didn't, because the truth was, it was the most honest image of me I'd seen in years. Not posed, not polished, just present. I put it back down. Didn't mention it. The next evening, Mark asked Ethan if he'd considered staying longer. Of course, Mark said, just until you figure things out. No rush. Ethan looked at me when he answered. I don't want to overstay. You wouldn't be, Mark insisted. Right, honey. I nodded, carefully. Of course not. But I didn't sleep well that night. It was raining the next afternoon when Ethan offered to drive me to the store. Nothing dramatic, just soft, steady drizzle. We didn't talk much on the way there. The radio filled the silence. But on the way home, he pulled into a small overlook, one I didn't even know existed. Thought you'd like this, he said. We sat in the parked car, watching the rain lace across the windshield. The view stretched over a quiet valley, mist rolling between the trees. I come here when I need to think, he said. I turned to him slowly. And what are you thinking now? He hesitated, then said something that changed everything. I think I should leave. My heart stammered. Why? Because I don't want to make this harder for you. I didn't answer, because I didn't know what I wanted. Back home, Mark was watching a documentary, utterly absorbed. Ethan went straight to the guest room. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the flicker of the stovetop light. That night, I found another photo, tucked between books in the hallway shelf. It was of a tree, alone, growing sideways from a cliff, stubborn and beautiful. On the back, in careful handwriting, were 5 words. Something's been to survive. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I made tea, and I stood at the window watching the street, wondering if I had already crossed a line or if I was still standing at its edge. The longing wasn't for Ethan. It was for me. The version of myself I'd tucked away. The woman who once dreamed without guilt. The morning after he said he should leave, the house felt heavier. It wasn't what he said, really. It was what he didn't say. The weight behind the words. The quiet sense that something delicate had tilted slightly off balance. Mark noticed nothing. He kissed my forehead on his way out the door, made some comment about the dry cleaning, and asked if I could pick it up. I nodded, smiled, said, of course, the usual script. But inside, I was somewhere else. Ethan didn't come downstairs until midday. When he did, his movements were slow, thoughtful. He didn't ask about breakfast. I didn't ask if he was okay. We were past that. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, and we shared a silence that felt like goodbye. I've decided, he said finally. I'm leaving tomorrow. I looked down at my tea. Okay, is that what you want? I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know. What I wanted wasn't him. Not really. It was clarity. Air. The space to ask myself who I had become when I stopped noticing. So I told the truth. I think it's what I need. That afternoon, I found myself cleaning. Not out of obligation, but ritual. I dusted bookshelves, rearranged the spice rack. I folded laundry that wasn't mine. Each task a way to remind myself that I still belonged here. That I had built a life, and it had walls that deserved honoring. Ethan stayed mostly in the guest room. Packing, I imagined. Or maybe just waiting for the right moment to disappear. Before dinner, he placed something on the kitchen counter and left the house without a word. It was an envelope. Inside was a photograph. Me again. This time in profile, backlit by sunlight through the lace curtains. One hand on the windowsill. My eyes closed. On the back, a note. You're still in there. I only reminded you. I held it for a long time. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. He left before dawn. No goodbyes. No final conversations. Just an absence that filled the corners of the house. Mark didn't ask where he'd gone. Maybe he assumed it was always temporary, or maybe he just didn't think anything had changed. That stayed with me longer than I expected. The days after felt strangely clean. Not empty. Just still. I began walking in the mornings. 15 minutes to the edge of the park and back. Sometimes I carried a small notebook, jotting down words that came to me. Not poems. Not journal entries. Just words. Freedom. Weight. Light. On the 3rd morning, I wrote, choice. And I understood what I hadn't before. It was never about Ethan. It was about the moment someone looked at me, not as a wife, not as a task, not as a presence in a shared schedule, but as a whole person. A woman with chapters still unwritten. He didn't rescue me. He reminded me I already had the strength. He reminded me I didn't need saving. Just remembering. One night, Mark and I sat side by side on the couch. We were watching something. We always were. And out of nowhere, I asked, do you think we've changed? He glanced at me. What do you mean? Since we met. Since we started this life. He thought for a moment. We've gotten older. We've settled. I nodded. That's not always a good thing. He looked at me then, really looked. Maybe for the first time in months. Are you unhappy? No, I said. But I might be going through the motions. He didn't answer. But he took my hand. And that was enough. For now. A week later, I opened the back closet and found the box of paints I hadn't touched in years. I laid out the brushes, bought new canvas, set up a small corner in the laundry room. I didn't know what I wanted to paint, but I knew I needed to. And in that small act, returning to something I used to love, I began to reclaim a part of myself I hadn't realized had gone missing. Ethan and I never spoke again. He became part of a memory, a quiet chapter tucked inside another life. But when I think of him now, it's not with longing, it's with gratitude, for reminding me that I am still becoming, for seeing me before I remembered how to see myself, and for leaving so I could learn how to stay.